It's been nearly 2 weeks since Sean Diddy Combs was arrested in a swanky New York City hotel and held behind bars until his trial. To some, his arrest may have come as a shock, but to many legal analysts we've interviewed at Law&Crime, his arrest was a long time coming. Through his attorney, the disgraced mogul maintains his innocence, but he was denied bail not once, but twice after prosecutors accused the Bad Boy founder of witness tampering. And he pleaded not guilty to his charges, which include racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking by force, fraud, coercion, and transportation to engage in prostitution. At the center of the federal government's case against him are Diddy's freak-offs or orgies. The freak-offs were first mentioned in Cassie Ventura's jaw-dropping lawsuit filed in federal court on November 16th of last year. The suit was settled within a day of the filing for an undisclosed amount, and Diddy denied all the allegations against him. But the allegations came full circle when many of the claims in her suit were echoed by the federal government in their indictment against the mogul. According to the 14-page indictment, the federal government alleges Diddy threatened and coerced women and others around him to fulfill his sexual desires for years. Federal prosecutors allege the Bad Boy founder forced victims into sex acts or freak-offs and recorded the encounters for his viewing pleasure. The document says, Diddy used force to cause victims to engage in extended sex acts with male commercial sex workers that Combs arranged, directed, masturbated during, and often electronically recorded. And the freak-offs were fueled by drugs and often went on for days at a time. According to prosecutors, the victims were filled with drugs to control them for long stretches of time, and participants typically had to get IV fluids to recover from the physical exertion. And if that wasn't shocking enough, Diddy allegedly used the recordings as collateral to ensure the continued obedience and silence of the victims. Months prior to his arrest in late March of this year, the mogul's Miami and Los Angeles mansions were raided by federal agents. Once the indictment came out, we learned more about what was recovered from the homes, including 3 AR-15s with defaced serial numbers, drugs, and more than 1,000 bottles of baby oil and lubricant. According to Cassie's now settled lawsuit against Diddy, Diddy's assistants who would help set up the freak-offs in hotel suites stocked the rooms with baby oil and Astroglide. According to court documents, Diddy would instruct Cassie during the freak-offs to pour an excessive amount of oil over herself during the encounters. But in an interview, Diddy's defense attorney seemingly had an explanation for the high amount of baby oil and lubricant seized by the feds. We cover a lot of horrific cases here at Law&Crime, which can go to show how unpredictable and scary the world can be. And one of the scariest things that can even happen is if you get seriously hurt or injured. So that's where our sponsor and proud partner of Law&Crime, Morgan & Morgan, can help. They have a team of more than 1,000 attorneys who will fight for what you deserve, and their track record proves it. In the past few months, Morgan & Morgan won verdicts like $12 million in Florida, $26 million in Philly, and nearly $7 million right here in New York, and all of which were considerably higher than the highest insurance offer. Even if your case isn't worth 7 figures, why not start a claim and get the money you deserve? Seeing if you have a case is super easy and can be done in 8 clicks or less. You don't even have to leave the couch to start one. And guess what? They offer a $0 and 0 cent upfront fee. You only pay them if you win. So if you're injured, you can start by easily submitting a claim at forthepeople.com/YouTube takeover. In an interview with TMZ, Diddy's attorney Marc Agnifilo claimed his client bought the items in bulk because he has a big house. During the sit-down with TMZ's Harvey Levin, Agnifilo said, "I don't know where the number 1,000 came from. I can't imagine it's thousands, and I'm not sure what the baby oil has to do with anything." When Levin explained to him the number came from the federal indictment and the baby oil was used as lubricant for the orgies, the producer's attorney responded in part by saying, "1 bottle of baby oil goes a long way. I don't know what you need 1,000 for." And while denying the magic number of 1,000, Agnifilo did confirm a lot of oil was taken from his clients' homes. Agnifilo even claimed the disgraced mogul used big box stores to make the purchase, saying, "I think they have Costco's in every place where he has a home. Have you sat in the parking lot of a Costco and see what people walk out of there with?" But Costco responded essentially saying, "Not so fast." A spokesperson for Costco said none of the company's stores in the U.S. even carry baby oil. Agnifilo has claimed the freak-offs were consensual, saying they were typically threesomes with Diddy, another male, and Cassie. He told TMZ, "Back when I was a kid in the late 70s, they were called threesomes." It was a sentiment that he echoed to the New York Post last week. And you know these are consensual adults doing what consensual adults do. You know we can't get puritanical in this country to think that somehow sex is a bad thing, because if it was there would be no more people. But could we get an explanation from Diddy himself? During Agnifilo's interview with TMZ, the high-powered criminal defense attorney said, "I don't know that I could keep him off the stand. I think he is very eager to tell his story." Diddy explained his side of the story once before while addressing the brutal assault he inflicted on Cassie at an LA hotel in 2016. The gruesome video was made public this year when released on CNN. It was so horrific to watch and the backlash was so intense, it prompted him to release this statement.
I was up. I hit rock bottom, but I make no excuses. My behavior on that video is inexcusable. I take full responsibility for my actions in that video. I'm disgusted. I was disgusted then when I did it. I'm disgusted now. I went and I sought out professional help. I had to go into therapy. Going to rehab. Had to ask God for his mercy and grace. I'm so sorry. But I'm committed to be a better man each and every day. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm truly sorry.
But when Diddy's attorney was asked about the violent assault video, he said his client wants to address every part of his story, including what you see in the video, and added, "I expect it's going to be explained by the both of us." But the mogul will have some time to get ready for his high-profile trial, because while remaining in the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn, no trial date has been set yet. Well, I think this is a great time to bring on criminal defense attorney Safa Robinson. Safa, always great to have you on. When Diddy was arrested just last week and the indictment was made public, one thing a lot of people had to talk about was the more than 1,000 bottles of baby oil and lubricant recovered from his mansions during the raids. But Diddy's defense attorney, Marc Agnifilo, is claiming that high number was because his client likes to buy in bulk and has a big house. What do you make of that, of him saying that?
That's certainly a fair point that the defense is trying to make. Essentially, what he's trying to do is ensure that things that normal Americans might do, such as buying in bulk from BJ's or buying normal products such as baby oil that many use to moisturize and for other means or reasons, isn't criminalized. It's not illegal to buy baby oil. It's not illegal to buy lubricant. It's not illegal to buy things in bulk. So what I think his attorney is trying to do here is say, listen, stop. I understand that, this may be baby oil and the charges that he may be facing are sexual in nature, but he buys them in bulk. He's got at least 2 or 3 mansions that are spread across this country. He's not an individual that can just walk freely into a grocery store or a Costco or anything like that. So that's the reason why, he may essentially have that large amount.
And during that interview with TMZ's Harvey Levin, it was interesting because he claimed he didn't know where that number came from, despite more than 1,000 literally being in the federal indictment, and didn't know what it had to do with the case. Are you surprised kind of about his nonchalantness when it comes to the seriousness of the charges that Diddy's facing, given that these were allegedly used in these freak-offs?
I think that number certainly has been talked about quite a bit. I do believe it's in the indictment, and I believe that information was conveyed in the press conference by the U.S. attorney. So it's not a surprise that that's the number. I'm not sure why he acted that as if that was a surprise to him. I don't think there's a nonchalantness with regard to what Mr. Combs is charged with on his attorney's behalf. As a fellow criminal defense attorney, it seems to me that he's been, handling this with his client throughout the investigation stage. And now that we're at the indictment stage and he's made motions or applications for his client's release, he's taking things a step at a time. First things first is we want to get our clients out of custody if that's something that we can do. So that was his primary focal point for some time when these charges were initially filed and dropped. Now, as he's in the process of getting discovery, which is sent over from the U.S. Attorney's Office, now he's going to have confirmation of that $1,000 or 1,000 bottles of baby oil or lubricant, or it could be different. There could be 800. Sometimes U.S. attorneys, they make these allegations. Not all of them may be true. Or they should be true, but there may be some discrepancy with regard to numbers. So that's something that they're going to have to prove if that's an allegation that they make. And their attorney, Mr. Combs' attorney, is going to be able to challenge that.
And the defense is claiming Diddy did nothing wrong. The freak-offs were consensual. And during his interview with TMZ, he said back in the 70s, he being Marc Agnifilo, said that, back in the day, they used to call them threesomes. What are your thoughts on him making that statement?
Again, what I think he's trying to do is he's trying to decriminalize things that some Americans or some people may participate in. It's not illegal to have a threesome. It's not illegal to have a sexual encounter unless it's with an individual that's underage or unless it's with a person that cannot consent. So one of the angles I expect that he would be taking is that these were consenting adults, that all of these adults consented to this activity, and that if it's two or more people, of course, it's a threesome or some type of, orgy party, that all of them were willing participants. And so, again, these are things that do occur and they're not illegal unless there is some type of, caveat. There's a but for it. And so he's trying to say, hey, everybody, let's stop for a second. It's not illegal to buy baby oil. It's not illegal to buy lubricant. It's not illegal to engage in a threesome. So I think that's the angle that he's taking.
And how important are the freak offs when it comes to the federal government's case against Diddy? In the indictment, it was alleging that these freak offs were last days. A lot of the victims would have to use IV fluids to pretty much recover from these freak offs. They were allegedly recorded by Diddy so he could either use them as collateral or use them for his own self pleasure. But how important do you think these parties, per se, are going to be to the federal government's case?
I think they're going to be crucial to the federal government's case because the things that they're alleging are that Mr. Combs engaged in uh, racketeering type of activity and sex trafficking and prostitution, engaged or forced individuals to engage in commercial sex acts. And due to that force or coercion or things of that nature, what I expect that they're going to try to do is create a link between narcotics use and those freak offs, or force, physical force, and connecting them to forcing an individual to participate in those alleged freak offs with commercial sex workers. So I think that that is going to be highly important. And then we've also got, the IVs, for example. Well, what would be the need for someone to take an IV? Oftentimes that happens if there's dehydration, to rehabilitate the body after drug use and things of that nature. So I think that's very important to the government's case here.
And during that interview with TMZ, Marc Agnifilo says that he believes Diddy will take the stand in his own defense. Again, they have maintained his innocence throughout everything like that. What do you think that would look like if Diddy did take the stand? And if you were Diddy's defense attorney, would you advise your client to do this?
I would not advise my client to take the stand at all. There's so much evidence here. And of course, we're going to want to evaluate the evidence as best as as we can as we prepare for trial. But Diddy has a right to remain silent. He doesn't have to go into that courtroom and say a word. It's the government's burden to prove his guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. And I think that this case has had so much media exposure. The allegations are, they can be highly offensive to many people, that there are already people that don't like him. So it's not going to do him any help to put his own self on the stand, waive his right to remain silent, and be subject to cross-examination by the U.S. Attorney's Office to possibly answer questions that may be difficult. For example, why did they have these AR-15s with scratched off serial numbers? He's going to have to answer to that. And so that's really difficult. I think that less is best in that area, especially if the government puts on all of its proof and they can't meet that burden. There's already a question of whether there was consent. There's already a question, and what his defense attorney is attempting to do is decriminalize normal American acts. And so if they continue to go in that direction, he may have a fighting chance, but him testifying is not something that I'd advise.
And an argument that Marc Agnifilo made last week during the bail hearings was that he believes the federal government is essentially prosecuting sex. What are your thoughts on kind of him making that comparison where he believes that sex is kind of on trial here?
You know, that I can't say for sure. I don't think that the federal government is trying to prosecute sex. What I think they're trying to do is protect victims, and that's their job. We've got an allegation here that there was some sort of, use of force or physical violence to get victim one to engage in commercial sex acts with commercial sex workers. So, again, if those allegations are true, that's illegal. It appears that there may have been a number of individuals based on these lawsuits, whether true or not, that have been impacted by his alleged activity. So, one of the things the government needs to do is protect its citizens, and this is the reason for the prosecution. And with respect to punishing sex, for example, I don't necessarily think that that's the case. I think that, they have a duty to, prosecute allegations of this nature, and maybe every sex act may not be an illegal act, but some may be. And one of the catch all things with respect to these charges is that that you'll see in the indictment is there's a wide net because of the allegation that these things were done via interstate commerce. So the trafficking and transporting of commercial sex workers via interstate commerce, and an alleged victim who may have had the use of force or coercion to participate in these sex acts. So those things are illegal. I don't think that it's essentially to villainize sex, but to protect the public.
And as a criminal defense attorney, what are your thoughts beyond that? Diddy's defense attorneys say that all of this was consensual. What type of other avenues or routes do you think the defense will take in making their arguments as we're slowly easing into the trial aspect of everything?
Well, I think the most important thing he's going to have to go at is that these things were consensual. And I also think that that's why he's trying to decriminalize this idea or this aspect of the 1,000 bottles of baby oil and lubricant and things like that. There are maybe some areas of this, depending on how the evidence comes in, that he just simply did not do. But there may be some things that he has to answer for if the evidence is overwhelming. And I'm sure that the defense is going to be, looking at what else they can exploit to protect Mr. Combs from a guilty verdict on this. But I think the most important thing here is going to be, consensual, the idea of that this was consensual. Not only that, he'll have to get around some other aspects with regard to the commercial sex workers and things like that, and the force and coercion. So the focus will ultimately turn on that as well.
And you mentioned before that, the federal government, as we all know, does have the burden of proof in this case. What type of uphill battles are they facing as they're preparing for trial?
As they prepare for trial, they're going to have to face the battle of parsing through this discovery and making sure that chains of custody are appropriate and fully established. Whoever, say, for example, with the bottles of baby oil, who located those bottles of baby oil, how are they taken into custody, what chain of evidence, can be established with respect to that. Another thing that they're also going to have an uphill battle in fighting and ensuring is that their victims are cooperative, or their alleged victims are cooperative. Whoever victim number one is, at some point, this person's going to have to get on the stand and testify to what allegedly happened in order to establish Mr. Combs' guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. That person's going to have to establish and testify to either the force used, her lack or his or her lack of ability to consent, and all of those sorts of things. And usually as we start to get on the eve of trial, complainants or alleged victims, they get scared, they don't want to testify, they don't want to cooperate any further. So that's certainly a battle the prosecution is going to have to face, along with the public scrutiny and whoever this person may be, dealing with that public scrutiny as they prepare to testify for themselves.
And prosecutors have said, during that press conference just last week that the investigation is still ongoing. Do you think that Diddy could face more charges in this case?
That's certainly a possibility. There could at some point be a superseding indictment. But it sounds to me like, based off of the evidence that was obtained in prior raids and things like that, which I think were earlier this year, they've probably parsed through all of the evidence that they could and charged what they could via grand jury. So at this point, I don't know that there will be more charges. I don't expect that there will be. But sometimes prosecutors try to keep things in their back pocket as leverage, to try to leverage a plea with the defendant. And if not, well, we'll add these additional charges. So.
And I did have one more question for you. How important is that brutal assault video that was released on CNN just a few months ago? How important will that also kind of play and factor into the case as well, too? Prior to that, Diddy has denied. That video came out, shocked so many people that it even prompted him to issue an apology video for himself while not naming Cassie in it. But he also, issued that apology. But in your opinion, how important is that video when it comes to the prosecutors or prosecution's case?
think that that video is going to be a crucial piece for the prosecution. You know, in the past week or so, I've heard, or, you know, it may be true that there was an alleged sex worker in that hotel room. And so as a result of that, you know, Miss Ventura exited the hotel room. We see him stop her and do what he did to her in that hallway. And I think that essentially goes to the prosecution's theory. If she's victim number one, that he used the threat of force and physical violence to force her to engage in sexual performances with commercial sex workers. And that video is a key example of how he's alleged to have done that. So I think that's going to be huge. Of course, the defense is going to try to keep that out. It can be considered a prior bad act, but the prosecution is certainly going to want that in.
All right. Well, Safa Robinson, I appreciate your insight into all of this. I really do. Before we sign you off, anything else you'd like to add?
No, thank you for having me today.
All right, Safa, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And Sean Combs, aka Diddy's next court appearance is slated for October 9th. Of course, stick with Law and Crime for the latest developments and coverage from that hearing and more. Reporting for Law and Crime, I'm Elizabeth Millner.